Hey guys, this is Sino Talk here, Joaquin Camarena, and I'm going to be discussing the weekly events in the Indo-Pacific, which there's a lot. So let's go ahead and go ahead and begin with Oceania, that region that is not really discussed. So the first is that the interesting little tussle, if you will, between the Cook Islands and the New Zealand governments. They're The PM of the Cook Islands, Mark Brown, wants his own citizens to have their own passports. However, Winston Peters, New Zealand's foreign minister, said that if this does occur, and they do have citizenship and membership in the United Nations, that means they were a fully independent and sovereign country. And Cook Islands cannot have that if they remain in free association with New Zealand. But they can only do that if they become fully independent, which kind of points to that. It kind of points to what Mark Brown wants to do. Now, it's important to note that New Zealand or Cook Islands in New Zealand are in a full are in a free association, meaning that the Cook Islands have can conduct its own internal affairs, domestic matters, economics, um, border policy. However, foreign affairs, disasters, and defense will be handled exclusively by New Zealand. So it's very interesting to see how the Cook Islands have now moved in this direction, which has been happening for a long time now. But it's really interesting to see this continue. It's really interesting to see that it reached this point. Now, will this go? Now, will this occur? Possibly, possibly not. Now, the Cook Islands are going to decide this on a referendum to be at a later date. So, realistically, the Cook Islands will have to make a determination as if whether or not they want to become a de facto sovereign nation, or remain in free association with New Zealand and come with the perks of New Zealand citizenship, um, passports, etc. So it'd be really interesting to watch, and yeah, it would be really interesting to watch. Next one is Tonga. So I mentioned this last time in the recorder stream that the Tongan PM resigned during a legislative session uh, in late or in early December, and it looks like we are finally going to get to know a new PM. The vote will happen on Christmas Eve their time, so maybe around this time right now. And so the legislature, which is made up of 17 people's representatives and 9 nobles, because Tonga is a kingdom, will vote on a new PM um, today or today their time or Christmas Eve their time. And so should really point out that the two nominees are reported to be Dr. Ananski Iski and Dr. Wilhelmi Latu. Forgive me if I butcher those names. I don't I don't speak Tongan, but yeah. So it'll be interesting to see which one gets the vote because um, Dr. Iki, who actually followed the motion of no confidence against the 4 p.m., um, that he would be able to win it outright. However, Dr. Latu, he's a current cabinet minister. He's been nominated by the current government, and so it will be really interesting to see which one they get, which one actually secures the prime minister position. Now, to me, I think it would be Dr. Latu who would actually get the position. Um, because one thing to know is that the noble block, the nine noble representatives, usually like to vote in a single block, and whereas the people's representatives they usually vote how they feel or how they or how they would view their constituents. And so it would be really interesting to see how this goes. Hmm. And then finally, for the last one, is that in Fiji, the former police chief um, has been picked again to lead the police force. It's important to note that Rusete Tavalu, he was actually resigned from the role in 2021 after serving for almost 40 years. And it was really interesting because the current PM, Sabalu Rabuka, he said that he was picked for the job because he was just he met the right requirements. He passed the rigorous selection progress, quote unquote. Now, it's important to note that he was previously the deputy police commissioner, and he was actually the leader during whenever Sapalu Kipalu um, uh, in his absence, the former another police commissioner, and the reason why he resigned actually in August 2021 is because personal reasons, quote unquote. But then also around this time, you kind of started seeing a lot of backlash with not only the police force but with the um, then government. So it will be really interesting to see how that how his tenure uh, unfolds. It is also pointed out and also be highlighted that Ubuka said that a former New Zealand police commissioner, Mike Bush, will be embedded in the Fiji police headquarters as Tuvalu's mentor. And so it's really important to highlight that as well because it shows that, you know, for a lot of the pushback that New Zealand and Australia received from not only Fiji, but Vanuatu, Karuti, regarding having, foreign uh, officials within the judiciary or within their foreign policy or economics, they still want them to be around as a be around as a guide or a mentorship or a mentoring force for the police and defense force. And it really shows that how strong the influence New Zealand and Australia have regarding that. But then also it shows that Rabuka understands that, you know, the police force do play a role in the previous coups. And I do believe Rabuka himself actually played a role in some of the previous coups as well. So he may have put those bosses in there. He may have put the new Mike Bush there as a hedge towards any funny business. But yeah, the new but Tuvalu will begin his duties in February 2025, and again, it will be interesting to see what policies he's going to implement, um, especially regarding China. It'd be interesting to see if he would be a strong advocate for renewing any policing agreements that they had. um, and to see if they have and to have a bigger presence for China within the island group. So that does it for Oceania. I'm gonna go ahead and go to South Pacific, guys. I'm gonna go and do a little bit different. Usually, I like to go Northeast Asia, China, South Korea's, Japan, Taiwan, Southeast Asia. But I'm gonna go ahead and do something different because and go with South Asia because this just came out. Um, because apparently Pakistan now has the um, Pakistan has approved the acquisition of fifth gen J-35 stealth fighters from China. Um, with those deliveries expected to be within the next 24 months. Um, and the J-35 is expected to replace aging fighters, quote unquote, aging fighters, quote unquote, such as the F-16 as well as the Mirage. Um, it should be known that only local Pakistani news outlets have reported on this. And again, this hasn't been a recent thing. Um, there's been multiple news articles within the last year and a half that announcing that the Pakistani Air Force will procure the J-31 as the J-35 was previously known as, and now the J-35. Um, I don't know if China would actually allow them to buy it, or China would allow. I don't know if China would allow them to buy it because um, it is a it is a extremely poor country. They barely have enough funds to cover, what they have right now in terms of military or even run the government. Um, furthermore, you need the logistical train to actually maintain these aircrafts. Um, yes, one could argue that the J-10s, they have the J-10 and J-15, JF 17s, that they've shown their ability to actually maintain them. However, you know, it should be noted that those aircraft usually get sent to, back to China or have Chinese technicians actually maintain them within Pakistan. So I don't know if Pakistan will have the capabilities to do that themselves, or whether or not they will be able to push them to, or whether or not they're going to have to send them back to China because, the lack of maintenance capabilities, but then also China simply doesn't trust them. I assume it's going to be a combination of both, unfortunately. Um, Another thing is that, you know, this may be, fake news, or maybe just not fake news, but, misconstrued. Like, they may have said, approval may have been just them looking into the acquisition. So it's be really interesting to see. And some of the news outlets actually said that the Pakistani Air Force actually sent pilots to train on the J-35. Um, it would be really interesting to see if that is true. I don't even know if the J-35 is still under development. Actually, I believe it's in the later stages of the development. So it would be really interesting, again, to see if this is true. Bigger would show that China is views itself as more than capable as of producing not only the J-35 for the for its military, the PAP, the PAF. the PLA Air Force, PLA Naval Air Force, or Naval Aviation Wing, or however you want to call it. But more importantly, they have the capability to produce them for export. So the J-35E for export. So it'd be really interesting to see if that is true. And then going to India. So the defense the Indian the India's defense ministry has undertaken a critical review of tri-service, um, Indian Air Force, Indian Navy, Indian Army priorities and solutions. They basically said that they basically directed senior officials and officers from the three branches to work together and identify priorities and problems and solutions to fast track procurement. So, not to go too deep into this subject, it actually is indicative of how the Indian government, but also the Indian Ministry of Defense, is beginning to understand that their procurement process is extremely bloated, filled with bureaucratic obstacles, corruption as well, a lot of corruption within their domestic industrial complex, industrial military industrial complex. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this actually pulls out because uh, the ministry told them, uh, hey, it's an internal study that, hey, the three armed services, we want to understand what your priorities are when it comes to procurements over the next 8 to 10 years. And that's important to note because of, the fifth or sixth gen stealth fighter that India is allegedly trying to join, uh, that is being built by, the UK, Japan, and I believe Italy or France. And they're trying to. There's been some talk with. There's been some talk of either India or Saudi Arabia joining them to actually help them offset some cost, maybe share some technology. So it'll be really interesting to see if that comes up as well. But then also their own their own fifth gen fighter projects as well. But then also the Tejas aircraft as well, because that's one of the best. Um, that's actually is one of the. I hate to say I hate to frame it like this. One of the best examples of bloated um, procurement factors or procurement processes that India ever had, because originally it was supposed to be a it was originally supposed to come online, I believe, in the mid 2000s. And while it did, it had a lot of issues with it that only now it is now coming now being overcome. Now another one that's not really known to outside people except for maybe those who love armor, love tanks, such as Taker's official on Instagram, or AFV underscore recognition. Um, the Arjun main battle tank. Um, that's another one that is a perfect example of the bloated procurement process because they built this tank up as a Leopard 2 but in Indian stripes, if you will, and it failed. Like the first batch Mark One series had so many issues that the Indian Army literally did not want this. They literally told the Ministry of Defense and DADIO, their um, Defense Research and Procurement Agency, that hey, this tank is crap. Like it overheats. India's a hot place. Like not only that, but the optics are bad. Could we please have our T-72s and T-90s back, please? And it's one of those things where the Indian government said no, we spent X amount of dollars on this project. You're going to keep them, and you're going to use them, and that's what they did. And over time, the Mark II and Mark III have came out to that actually overcame a lot of those issues, but the taste of that procurement process still lingers heavily within the Indian Army, even to this day. And you kind of see that with them with any type of armored vehicle program that they have, including their next generation IFV, next generation APC as well. You kind of see some hints of that because of how they handle and how they are so hands-on with this project, with those projects, let's say. The Indian Navy, not so much. Been pretty good with their um, they've been pretty good with their procurement process. I mean, their subs have been issued. There've been issues with their subs, um, but that's mainly more along the lines of I don't know how to frame this without making it seem as if it's well, their submarines. They procure them from Russia or France, but then also they're trying to develop their own. And while it has succeeded in some areas, they have their own. They're developing their own or have developed their own, nuclear submarine or nuclear attack submarine. It still has a lot of issues with that program. Actually, let me look that up because I do know that they because I do know that they have tried to develop those nuclear submarines. And yeah, like so the Iraq class, those developing them, they actually have completed three, and that's what I was talking about regarding the issues. And again, it's not really them; it's just them trying to overcome the technological quarters, and they have to depend upon Russia or historically dependent upon Russia, but then also but now they're trying to switch towards, France, Japan, the United States, Great Britain, those countries to actually gain, access to technologies that historically Russia would have been more than happy to provide them, but due to the ongoing sanctions and as well as, the ongoing issues with them trying to procure parts and uh, parts and equipment because of the ongoing Ukraine conflict, they're looking at other places, at other countries. Okay, so going there from, go ahead and go do Northeast Asia. Wait 1 second. And then we'll go back to Southeast Asia. So, two things I want to point out, mainly in Taiwan and South Korea and North Korea as well. Um, One of the big things with North Korea is that, one of the a newly passed opposition-led amendment will force the central government to reallocate new Taiwan dollar 375 billion. I know that sounds a lot, but it's 11 billion. 11.5 billion, if we're rounding up, on USD in its annual budget. So what that means is that it's going to have a lot of cuts across all sectors, but then also, but more specifically, defense. So this comes as, this comes as the legislative yuan, the KMT and TTP, Taiwan Power, TPP, Taiwan Power Party. They've um, essentially pushed through some bills lately without the uh, Democratic Progressive Party that currently heads the government voting on them. And this is one of them. It's it's really indicative of how these it's really indicative of how the KMT is trying to make it hard for the for the government of William Lai to actually operate. And it's really interesting that they slash a lot of the programs that were a major issue within the current election, or within the last election, the last presidential election, general election, that saw the election of William Lai. You have defense, China increasingly aggressive posture against Taiwan. You have labor, which a lot of issues regarding that. Regarding that was a known issue within the Taiwanese election, but then also rent subsidies, which surprisingly enough, the TPP, the now former leader, um, that was one of his championing uh, things whenever he was the a mayor, is that we want to lower rents. We want to lower rent because in Taiwan the rent is extremely high. Um, to give you a broad comparison, it would probably be comparable to San Francisco, New York City, those levels, those comparable to those prices, to those prices. So it's really interesting to see them wanting to cut those programs, or or doing this amendment that would lead to these cuts. But I'm going to focus upon the defense budget specifically because the one of the officials, he said, like, after the amendment, after the amendment passed, so he said that the remaining portion, 1.31 trillion New Zealand dollars, um, she actually said that the defense budget may have to be reduced by as much as 25% or 28%, excuse me. Um, if not, then cuts would have to be imposed on already approved or ongoing projects, such as the high 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 Hycon submarine indigenous submarine program, the various drone programs that they have, um, etc. And so, to give you a point, is that to give you a highlight on how bad it would go, is that the current budget as it stands, is the current defense budget is $294 and $294 billion. 200, forgive me, uh, 295 billion. I'm just gonna round up, and the cut in the 25 and the 28 reduction would mean a cut of over $82 billion, and this is New Zealand dollars, New Taiwan dollars. Forgive me. So you're looking at $212 billion for their now potentially for their defense budget, and it comes at a time when Trump is coming into office, and he wants countries, including Taiwan, especially Taiwan, to actually foot their share of defense, if you will. And Taiwan is actually one of the countries who understands that, hey, um, we want to make sure this is, we want to make sure we want to continue Taiwan. We want to continue to have, the U.S. support. So yes, we are going to do our utmost to increase, to maintain a good budget to be able to provide for our own defense. And then this happens. So it's really interesting that, um, that this occurs. And again, it just shows that, the KMT and TPP are trying their utmost to make William Lai's job at governing, or his government, uh, to do his in his government, to do their job, really impossible. Let me rephrase that, because it it come it really shows that the KMT is and the TPPs really doing their best to make William Lai's and his government's job at governing Taiwan and implementing a lot of these programs in the budget really difficult. And that should make more sense than the soup sandwich that just spat out, guys. Another thing for Taiwan, the makers, so Zero Day, the TV series that was set around the invasion of a notional invasion of Taiwan by China, is really interesting. Um, it's really interesting because they it's really interesting that a lot of the makers and actors who actually participated in the program, they actually are thinking that they may face backlash from China, which you possibly will whenever this does occur, whenever this does come out. I believe uh, whenever this does come out, or whenever if it forgive me, I think it has came out now. So it's really interesting to see that a lot of these filmmakers and actors are now fearing China's response, not so much as military, but more economic coercion, which means that they may be blacklisted from being able to go to China, be able to participate in China's entertainment market, which is which would represent a significant loss on them. So it's really it shows how most Taiwanese view this, is that they want to talk about the um, they want to talk about a potential invasion of Taiwan, even though it's a really sensitive topic. However, the filmmakers and the creators, they understand they have to walk a tightrope, or walk a fine line between being able to produce this movie or produce this series, but then also not losing access to the very, very, very lucrative Chinese entertainment market. Okay, then going to everyone's favorite country, North Korea. So the Ukrainian military, Ukrainian special forces today, they've unveiled documents that shows that the Russian the Russian government, Russian military provided North Korean soldiers with fake military or fake IDs, and while the validity of these are not known, I mean um, it's not known. They haven't been independently verified, or they haven't really been um, proven as being correct. And so it's really interesting to see this is that, hey, Russia, and it show let me forgive me. It shows that Russia is trying its best to whitewash the North Korean identities, North Korean soldiers' identities, and make them, Eastern Asian, uh, make them Beirut or Tovin or one of the other ethnic minorities within Russia's Far East. And so, if this does come out as true, then it just shows that, on one level, Russia is still trying to hide the fact that, um, you know, that they have to ask North Korea to send, 10,000 soldiers, I believe, to actually um, participate in the war on their behalf. But then it also shows that for all of its rhetoric regarding, the bottomless pit of manpower, they have thousands of troops available to overrun Ukraine's defenses. That's not really true. And one thing to take away from this is that North Korea actually, um, uh, North Korea actually sent troops to Russia before Russia actually conducted a forced mobilization of its troops, forgive me, of its citizens in the um, in Moscow, Saint Petersburg, two places where the Slavic elite live, because they'll accept volunteers from the places, and other places uh, a major of major Slavic populations, but they try not to actually try not to actually get them. They try not to actively conscript them. But now we're seeing that Russia may not want to do that. They're trying everything in their power not to do that. They would probably, go out and conscript uh, Libyans or Azerbaijanis or anyone else before they conscript those population centers. Because if they have to, the war, then Putin's war may not last any longer. And then going back with North Korea is that they are alleging that they are allegedly preparing for additional troop deployment and to supply suicide drones to Russia. Now, this was made by South Korea's spy agency, and so I would say it's possibly true. And so, and they're going to be increasing the deployment of, they may be either rotating or increasing the deployment of troops specifically. And now, you know, everyone probably knows who's listening to this is that Russia or that um, North Korea is actually preparing to uh, manufacture suicide drones. They actually made that announcement, I believe, early this month or late last month. And it shows that, hey, while yes, they're preparing their own forces, modernizing their own forces to be able to be able to adopt and utilize these suicide drones because how effective they are. It shows how it shows that their willingness to continue to help Russia because a lot of those drones, or a significant portion, may actually be sent to uh, Russia to be used against Ukraine. And it would be interesting to see how they, if this is true, and if it is, then how effective these drones would be. Because in the tests that we saw in November, they were, they were hitting the targets. They were able to, go in, destroy the targets that they had. But, you know, the thing with, North Korea, you don't really know if it's true or false. Excuse me. And so another thing I want to touch upon before moving on to South Korea is that the New York Times said that the deployment of North Korean troops was likely Pyongyang's idea. It's really interesting if this is true. Um, if he's if Kim actually said I can give you 12,000 troops, and Vladdy, he quickly embraced it. Of course he did because they don't want to conscript the good Slavic pro traditional Christian men to go fight. They would rather deplete their Asiatic and other minority populations to get rid of them essentially. And so this was just icing on the cake. And then finally, an update about the ongoing fallout about the martial law announcement, not announcement, um, that Yoon, now former President Yoon, did in early December. So it turns out that the unification minister and the spy chief uh, have been questioned by investigators as part of their ongoing probes. So the foreign minister or the unification minister, underwent, questioning by police for 6 hours because of a cabinet meeting that occurred before you declared martial law, and so, and then as well as the spy chief as well, um, the head of the National Intelligence Service, he was actually questioned. But it's really important to note that the head was not a cabinet minister. He was not a member, but he was also one of the trail participants. And so and so the police actually have questioned 10 out of the 12 that have participated in the cabinet meeting, and so it shows how much how seriously they're taking this, but then also shows how high in the level of thought that the cabinet actually put into declaring martial law. But then also, as well as the willingness of the police force to actually go in and investigate and actually question active ministers. You have to understand the unification minister and the chief of the National Intelligence Service haven't resigned yet. Well, I shouldn't say yet, but they haven't resigned. So it's very important to highlight that. And then, as well as, um, issuing arrest warrants, which they've done with the um, commander of the Army Special Forces Warfare Command. Okay, now finally, it's the last one, and I saved this as the last since it's going to be kind of big. I'm going to try my best to go through it, but I'm going to discuss Myanmar. Um, if anyone's listening, can you let me know if you want that, if you want Myanmar updates to the front of the um, live stream, so I can do that for other live streams as well. I'm more than happy to do that. So, but yeah, going first is that the Akan army, they have taken control of the city of the western or the city of An, which is important because that's where the Western Military Command is located. So that means they captured it. They are, I want to say 40, or no, not 40. I want to say 30% of Rakhine State is now within junta control. If that, I'm being generous with that number. And the rest is under control of the Akan army and their associated People's Defense Forces. But it shows how degraded the it shows how degraded that it shows how degraded that the junta's militaries have become to allow a second West military command to fall. And then it says, the Myanmar, and then the Myanmar's current leader, Min Aung Hlaing, he said in a speech on December 16th that, the Air Force, on the Air Force Day, that air power is essential to winning wars. And while it is true, and, the junta had some success in um, holding back the, rebels, the ethnic armies advances, they have to confront the reality that, one, they don't really have they don't really have the equipment as well as the airframes necessary to maintain their op tempo. They've lost several helicopters, I believe 4 to 5 helicopters at this point. They did lose some aircraft, um, and so that just shows how degraded the Air Force is, especially with them just constantly being forced to go out and conduct these, bombing runs, bombing missions, and it puts a profound, it puts a, puts a lot of pressure on the Air Force as well as the airframes and pilots. So we're probably going to see a lot more issues, a lot more crashes, probably more shoot downs of the Air Force, of the aircraft as they ramp up operations. And then another one I want to point out is that the Korean National Union, they captured the last junta base in Maliplar. It's important to highlight this because be that used to be where the KNU, the Korean National Union base headquarters were, and it shows that the Korean, and again, it just goes back to my earlier point is that it shows how militarily degraded, or it shows how degraded the Joneses' military capabilities are. Because they had, yes, the siege lasted for approximately 1 month, but they still were able to capture it at the end of the day. And they couldn't, reinforce it. They couldn't, and the junta couldn't reinforce it. They couldn't help them. They couldn't actually do anything to prevent that. And then going on, the Kachin Independence Army, the they actually captured a they actually captured a outpost along the border with China, and this comes after um, the KNO, the Korean Independence Organization's leader, actually went to China for talks, and China repeatedly saying, "Please stop fighting against the junta, please." Um, but it just shows you that uh, it shows one, the KNI and other ethnic organizations, ethnically armed organizations, don't really care about what China says now, even if they do try to exert pressure on them by arresting, allegedly putting their leaders into under house arrest, cutting off water and electricity and trade again in these areas. They're going to continue to conduct these operations because they understand that, for better or worse, China isn't really the main foe. It's the junta, and that China only cares for trade. Along the trade flows, excuse me, the junta doesn't really care who's in charge. Like, the Care Bears could be in charge of Myanmar for all they care, and as long as they toe a line that's is amenable to China and the trade can flow, they don't really care who actually is in power. And then finally, I wanted to talk about let me see. Let me see. Finally, I want to talk about the Chin Brotherhood. Um, they announced that they've captured um, Mendat and Phalam towns. This is a really big thing because they've actually been fighting over this town for better part of 6 or 7 months now, and they were able to capture it. Now, it comes as are trying, the Chin ethnic groups are trying to, try to figure out like how to actually cooperate or whether or not they want to cooperate. There's been some beef between the Chin Brotherhood and the other main Chin ethnically armed organization, and so it's really interesting to see how um, it's really interesting to see the Chin Brotherhood succeeding while the other organization just lingers about. They didn't really participate in the fighting. They didn't really care. And so it's interesting to see that happen. And we may see some more successes with the Chin Brotherhood. Um, um, Okay, I only got 5 minutes left, guys. Going back to my earlier comment about the Arkan army, or about the junta actually capturing, um, controlling a large portion of a large portion of Rakhine State. It looks like the Western Military Command's positions in An was the last was allegedly the last remaining stronghold in Rakhine. So they may have actually outright captured most of the state. So that's really significant if that is true. So the last thing I want to talk about is how, going back to Rakhine State, is that the junta is actually bolstering defenses along the border with with Rakhine State and in Ayadi, I believe Ayadi region. Yeah, it's Ayadi region. And so the reason why they're doing that is because the Afghan army and its allies are pushing towards the state border, and the fear is that the Afghan army is able to do open up another front in the former homeland, against the junta. And so, if that does happen, it will significantly increase pressure against the against the junta military, to the point to where they would have to decide which front they would have to support. Because again, they don't really have enough resources to actually support fighting on three fronts: um, the border of Rakhine State, San State, and as well as the Karen and Kitchen State. So they may not have enough resources to fight that, to fight them successfully at one time. But then also, that's not even considering the various rebel groups, the PDFs that operate within the Burma homeland and actually conduct attacks against military positions. So we really so it's going to just increase pressure. Okay, guys, that's all I have for this live stream. Um, if you have any questions or you have any comments, drop them in the chat, and I'll do my best to answer them as I go through it during the week. And I hope everyone have a happy Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa if you celebrate that. Otherwise, happy holiday. And I'll be doing this again next week. Bye.